Everyone, welcome to the fifth lecture of this term. Today we'll talk about German standards and varieties and Umgangssprache. This is the lecture outline for today. First, I'll briefly talk to you about ideology and standard and language ideology. So far, we have done a lot of phonetics, phonology, morphology. We are yet to do syntax. And last time we did a lot of Old High German, Middle High German, New High German. In this lecture and in the next few lectures, I'll talk a little bit about what is done, researched, and practiced in sociolinguistics, and ideology is part of that. This relates to the idea of standard language. This relates to Umgangssprache. This relates to the concept of pluricentric languages and pluriareal languages. And then we will look at some pluricentric or pluriareal variation that exists in Switzerland and Austria. Now, first, let us talk about what is ideology. I have taken this, borrowed this definition from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' book called Die Deutsche Ideologie. And in this book, they define, they say the whole ideology amounts either to a distorted conception of history or a complete abstraction from it. So this might be a bit difficult, and you might wonder, how do I relate it to language? And that I will explain to you on the basis of standard language ideology. What I want you to know, and what I want you to remember, that this definition, it serves as the basis of the concept standard language ideology that shapes a lot of sociolinguistic research. So please remember this part, a distorted conception of the history. We will come to that. Ideology as a distorted view of reality. Marx and Engels argue that reality is based in material life, whilst ideology, which includes philosophy, religion, morality, jurisprudence, among others, is shaped by dogmatic dreamings and distortions. Therefore, in the framework of Marx and Engels, ideology can refer to a distorted view of reality. Okay? This is quite an important one. If you ever read about the concept ideology in any handbook related to humanities or the social sciences, you will come across this definition: inverted perception of reality, false consciousness and inverted perception of reality. And over years, the definition of ideology has changed in the humanities and the social sciences. So here I have taken a definition from Andrew Haywood, who says that ideology is a more or less coherent set of ideas that provide the basis for some kind of organized political action. So please bear in mind, for Marx and Engels, so in one framework, ideology is defined as distorted view of reality. So if you relate that to languages, it can be an idea that one language is inherently superior to another, or one language is inherently more beautiful than another. Then we have ideology as a basis for political action. And Haywood says these are a set of ideas that provide the basis for some kind of organized political action. Now, let us move on to language ideologies. So we have looked at two definitions, one by Karl Marx, one by Marx and Engels, one by Andrew Haywood. Then we have a definition by Michael Silverstein, who used to teach at the University of Chicago, passed away a few years ago. Quite renowned and accomplished sociolinguist. Silverstein says ideologies mean a set of beliefs about language articulated by users as a rationalization or justification or perceived language structure and use. Now you have to think about it. If you read the work of William Labov talks about variation in the New York City and how language is used in a different manner by people belonging to different social classes. Okay? Now, what would ideology do? Ideology would justify or rationalize this kind of perceived language structure, perceived language use. Ideology would be used to justify that the language used by one particular social class is inherently superior or inferior to another variety that is used by another social class. Okay? Now, the question is, whose interests are served by ideologies? We talk about ideology. What do we get from it? Whose interests are served by it? Ingrid Piller says that language ideologies are beliefs about language where linguistic difference is called upon to rationalize social organization. If you think about it, rationalize is also here, and Silverstein also talks about rationalization. What are the rationalizing? Linguistic difference. Here Silverstein is saying rationalizing perceived language structure and use. Linguistic difference is that somebody talks with RP, received translation, Oxford English or BBC English. Somebody does not talk with RP. Linguistic difference would constitute this difference in accents that gives the audience, the listener, an idea about which social class you belong to. Where did you go to school? Where you could have been born? Where did you grow up? Your accent reveals a lot. That is an example of linguistic difference. Now, what does ideology do? Ingrid Piller says language ideologies are beliefs about language where linguistic difference is called upon to rationalize social organization. So your linguistic difference, the way you use a certain variety, the way you speak, it is called upon to rationalize the social structure. Piller also says language ideologies are deployed in the interest of society's dominant group and serve to justify social inequality. Okay? So I belong to upper class, upper middle class, and my accent gets to become the dominant one. I belong to the ruling class and my variety gets to become the dominant one. My variety becomes the standard language, whilst the varieties spoken by the non-dominant people, the non-elite, are considered dialects. That would be an example of what Ingrid Piller is talking about here. Now, let us move on to the concept of standard language ideology. Lippy Green says, a bias towards a standard, idealized, homogeneous spoken language which is imposed and maintained by dominant bloc institutions and which names as its model the written language, but which is drawn primarily from the spoken language of the upper middle class. Okay? So far so good? It's all clear? Jan Blommert, once again quite famous sociolinguist of the last 50 years, asks how are ideologies sustained? So if ideology is being used for the purpose of subversion, if for subjugation, how are they sustained? Okay, and then he says ideologies do not win the day just like that. They are not simply picked up by popular wisdom and public opinion. They are reproduced by a variety of institutional, semi-institutional, and everyday practices. Now, what are these practices? So there could be campaigns for a particular way of speaking, particular way of writing. There could be regimentation in social reproduction systems. So it can be promoted in schools. A particular language can be promoted in administration, in army, advertisement, publications, and so on. Okay? I mean, if you think about it, think of the language situation in the UK. A lot of us, those who do not deal with language and languages in detail, might think if somebody asks you, what's the official language of the UK, how would you respond? What is the official language of the UK? Does the UK have any official languages? If yes, how many? Do you know? Yeah? Adam? It's 4. Okay, it's if you look at the legislation, it's not documented anywhere where it says that there is one particular official language of the UK. We perceive, we think it is English. If you look at British Nationality Act, it tells you that one of the languages that you have to know in order to acquire citizenship of the UK is English or Welsh. So not if you know only Scottish Gaelic or Irish or Manx, any other variety, then no, and that is one of the central criteria. If you look at legislation on citizenship across the world, one of the clauses may be you have to know German language to become German, or you have to know French to become French. So that citizenship requirement, language requirement in the citizenship clauses, they tell you about what is the official language, even if it is not officially put anywhere that XYZ is the official language of a given country. Now, Blomert says these reproduction practices may result, willingly or not, in normalization. Normalization is that you accept something as normal, and a hegemonic pattern in which ideological claims are perceived as normal ways of thinking and acting. Dominance is, you understand the term dominance, and hegemony is that when the subjugated class perceives the subjugation as being in its own interest. That is hegemony. Okay? So, Blomert rejects the idealist view of a language that treats ideational phenomena such as attitudes or ideologies as something that language users merely have. He's saying that you don't just have ideologies, this is indoctrinated. All right? Now, one of the things, this is something I put here to make the lecture a bit interesting. I want to talk about orthography. Have you ever thought about orthography being influenced by ideology? Is this possible? Can orthography be influenced by ideology? Sally Johnson says yes. She says, a focus on orthography, literally the assumption that there is only one correct way of writing, lends itself particularly well to the kind of historical materialist approach to language ideologies advocated by Blomert. An autonomous approach to orthography masks the ideological nature of choices made by real social actors in the creation and revision of writing systems. Now, orthography, why are we talking about ideology here when we talk about orthography? Because it is related to the idea of identity. Seba says, orthography, it touches on matters of social identity, national identity, cultural politics, representation, and voice. It matters to people in written German. Ka, U, scharfes S is not quite just as a Ka, U, doppel S. In Switzerland, people do not use scharfes S. So a word like stoßen would be written with Stossen in Swiss German, not in Swiss German, but in Switzerland's standard German. But the same would be written with a scharfes S in Germany. And it matters to them whether they use a scharfes S or not. So writing systems, they can be related to orthography. So that's one aspect of language that you covered that falls within the realm of ideology, in addition to accent and variation that we just talked about and will talk about now. So in the second section of today's lecture, I'll talk about standard language. What is standard German? What is standard language? The standard language is the variety that is typically described in grammar books and dictionaries, the variety that is used in school in Germany and taught to foreigners. Barber and Stevenson, and see, taught to foreigners part is important. I learned German as a foreign language, and the kind of German that I learned in New Delhi, and the kind of German that is taught at Goethe Institute across the world, that is the kind of German that is spoken in northern part of Germany around Hanover as standard German. At that time, we didn't have the awareness. We weren't taught that there are also regional variations that are taught in Austria, that exist in Austria or Switzerland. Now, Barber and Stevenson label this variety formal standard German since it is the variety that represents the speech and writing of educated people in formal situations. It is comparable not to standard English but to formal standard English. Hochdeutsch. Okay, you did Althochdeutsch, Mittelhochdeutsch last time, so you know that Hoch in Hochdeutsch is a geographical indicator. It is not related to prestige, but Hochdeutsch, the widespread misconception is that it refers to prestige. So Hochdeutsch is misunderstood as Hochsprache. The non-technical term Hochdeutsch is also used to refer to standard language. Virtually all native speakers interpret this term as synonymous with Hochsprache and are unaware of its technical sense. In the technical sense, Hochdeutsch means High German and refers to those dialects that participated in the High German consonant shift. So you remember the second sound shift? That's what Hochdeutsch is. So when you talk to people, when you talk to speakers of German, and if somebody is confused, maybe you can educate them and tell them what is the inherent bias there. Okay, let's talk about some more variation. Is it wegen dem or wegen des? Have you ever heard about it? Have you ever heard about Bastian Sick? Der Dativ ist dem Genitiv sein Tod. That's the name of the book. The name of the writer is Bastian Sick, S-I-C-K. Now, what is considered the norm in standard German can differ significantly from common practice. For example, quite a famous example, although colloquially and regionally the preposition wegen, because of, is common with the dative case, wegen dem Wetter, this is considered incorrect in the standard language where the genitive is required wegen des Wetters. Language textbooks are beginning to address such differences between the standard and everyday uses. And as I just took the name of Bastian Sick, please, when you go home, please look up who is Bastian Sick. And the name of the book, Der Dativ ist dem Genitiv sein Tod. That's a funny name in itself, because if I have to write the same thing in standard German, it should be Der Dativ ist der Tod des Genitivs, but it's written in a humorous manner, alluding to the Umgangssprache that is common in German. I also want you to think about, if a certain way of speaking is quite popular, is commonplace in a particular country, in a particular language area, should that become standard, or should we continue adhering to the written grammatical norm that we learnt in school? Now, status of the standard language across regions. The status of standard language differs from region to region. In German-speaking Switzerland, no member of the native population speaks standard German as a native language, although most speakers do acquire a certain level of proficiency in it. In southern Germany and Austria, native speakers of standard German are a smaller proportion of population than native speakers in northern Germany. This is taken from Barber and Stevenson, a rather dated research from 1990. It's been almost 30 years, so that research needs to be revised. But this is what Barber and Stevenson noted 30 years ago. Now the question is, have you ever wondered how does a variety become a standard? There is so much variation in the UK. There is Geordie, Cockney, maybe a lot more that I'm not aware of, Glaswegian. Why is Glaswegian not as respected as RP? Okay. There are 4 aspects of language development, and this is taken from an essay. This is taken from an essay by Einar Haugen, Dialect, Language and Nation, published in American Anthropologist in 1966, more than 50 years ago, and quite an influential essay. Please note down the name of this essay. When you go home, read the essay, Dialect, Language and Nation, published in American Anthropologist. Einar Haugen says the 4 aspects of language development in taking the step from dialect to language or vernacular to standard are selection of norm, codification of form, elaboration of function, and acceptance by the community. The first two, selection and codification, refer to the form, and the last two to the function. So, what do? A language such as Scots has been trying for some years, or the speakers of Scots have been trying for some years, maybe some decades, to get Scots recognized as a language in its own right, not as a dialect of English, but a language in its own right. What happens there? What is the strategy? How does it become standard? So the first step is selection. How do they select which kind of Scots? Because the question is which kind of Scots. Even within the Scots community, Scots speaking community, there is substantial variation. There are 4 different kinds of Scots that are spoken in Scotland. They selected the variety that was spoken by the majority. So even within a language that was not dominant so far, that was viewed as a dialect, even within that language, you have to choose a variety that is spoken by the majority. Codification would include something like preparing the orthography. How do you write the language? You write grammars. Elaboration of function is that in what context can be used? Can I use it in the media? Can I use it in the schools? Can I use it in administration? Can I write a letter in Scots to my MP? Can I broadcast a program on radio, on TV in Scots? So that indicates like what kind of different functions it can serve. And acceptance by the community, that is quite important. I mean, you do all the work, but it cannot be accepted by the community. For example, in Luxembourg, after the Second World War, they tried to introduce a spelling system for writing Luxembourgish. And that was because Luxembourg was occupied by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. So obviously, as somebody from Luxembourg, you would be quite opposed to any kind of oppression that you faced in the past. But interestingly, that spelling system did not come through. It was not accepted by the people. Because even though ideologically they were distant from post-war Germany, it was not easy for the speakers of Luxembourgish to adopt a new writing system they were not familiar with at all. This is from post-war Luxembourg. So now coming back, this is a tabular representation of the 4-fold model of standardization. We have selection, codification, acceptance, and elaboration. Okay. Now let's talk about regional variation. Although Standard German can be characterized as a supra-regional variety with a uniform grammar and spelling, it does exhibit regional variation. For example, there are some meanings for which there is no supra-regional lexeme. A well-known example is Southern German Samstag and Northern German Sonnabend. The word for butcher, and that's quite an interesting one, the word for butcher are also regionally bound. Can I ask you, which is the word for butcher that you learned in school? Was it Metzger or Fleischer? Metzger? Okay. So here we have a graphic representation of the different words for butcher. Metzger, Fleischer, Schlachter, Fleischhacker, Fleischhauer. The green one, you see, it's quite prevalent. It's quite prevalent in a very large area. Fleischer is dominant in the north, northeast, Schlachter in the northwest, Fleischhacker, these red dots are here, East Austria, so Vienna, but it coexists with Fleischhauer, which is this red triangle. So you see they are coexisting. And then you have, interestingly, some blue dots here and there. So this is to show you how one particular word can vary in a great manner across different regions of the German-speaking area. Now, there can be variation in pronunciation, although several different consonantal R sounds are accepted as standard pronunciation. Their distribution can be described in regional terms. So, uvular R predominates in northern, central, and southwestern parts of German-speaking area, alveolar in the southeastern parts. In general, however, the standard is a fairly uniform variety of German, and regionalism is minimal. Now, let's move on to section 3. Umgangssprache. The colloquial language can itself be divided up into different varieties, although scholars are not in agreement as to how many varieties there should be. How many varieties should be recognized. Schoenfeld distinguishes 3 varieties of German between the Standard and the Low German dialect in the north of the former East Germany. Veit also recognizes 3 varieties of the colloquial in a study of the urban speech of Frankfurt, but his levels do not correspond exactly to those of Schoenfeld. Barber and Stevenson differentiate between 2 different types of colloquial German, colloquial standard German and colloquial non-standard German, in part because German speakers recognize this division in their own speech. Let's talk about variation in grammar when it comes to Umgangssprache. So maybe you're familiar with this expression, mein Vater ist am Schreiben. Okay? In Standard German, you say, mein Vater schreibt gerade. Umgangssprache, mein Vater ist am Schreiben. The use of am plus nominalized infinitive plus sein is the typical Northern German way of expressing progressive meaning overtly. According to Duden, similar progressive constructions with beim or im in place of am are considered standard. So, ich bin am Lachen, ich bin am Gehen, ich bin am Essen. The use of am is a regional colloquialism found particularly in the Rhineland and in Westphalia. What about da compounds? The splitting of da compounds is another characteristic of Northern German syntax. In Standard German, words formed using da followed by a preposition davon cannot be split into their component parts and separated by other sentence constituents. Dafür kann ich nichts. In Northern German, splitting is the norm in the colloquial language. Da kann ich nichts für. I can't help it. What about absence of an accusative-dative distinction in the North? In the North, in the variety of the colloquial language that Barber and Stevenson label colloquial non-standard German, the accusative-dative distinction is absent, a feature shared by Northern German dialects. One might hear, hat mir gesehen, in the North instead of the standard, hat mich gesehen. Okay? Use of nach instead of zu, so you can hear, ich gehe nach dem Bahnhof instead of ich gehe zum Bahnhof. One more non-standard uses. Then regional variation in the choice of auxiliary verbs. In the colloquial language in Northern Germany, we find the auxiliary sein rather than haben used with verbs beginnen and anfangen, both meaning to begin. Ich bin begonnen, ich bin angefangen, for saying I have begun. In the South, we find the auxiliary sein instead of haben with liegen, sitzen, stehen. Ich bin gelegen, ich bin gesessen, ich bin gestanden. Okay, so there is variation both in the North and the South with different verbs. What about plural formation? So you can see something like die Doctors instead of die Doktoren. Okay, so that's another examples. Die Wagens instead of die Wagen. Here we have some examples from the South. Die Wegen, and the standard is die Wagen. Die Stücke, die Stiefeln, die Stiefel. All right. What about variation in gender? Die Butter, das Radio, die Gewalt, der Bach, die Kartoffel. In the South, you can find der Butter, der Radio, der Gewalt, die Bach, der Kartoffel. Okay? Variation in vocabulary, North versus Standard. So in Standard, we say das Abendessen. In the North, you can hear das Abendbrot. Dann, North, then, pfeifen, flöten, die Kinder. In the North, die Gören, die Schublade, der Kasten, schlagen, kloppen, sehen, gucken, der Topf, Pott, Krawatte, Schlips, Moor, Rübe, die Wurzel. What about the South? Sehr. I'm laughing because I find the word funny. Arg. It's common in the South to use arg. Yeah, something like das ist org. Das ist arg. So sehr, and in the South they say arg, schnell, geschwind, Moorrübe, gelbe Rübe, Schornstein ist Kamin, Mädchen ist Mädel, Apfelsine ist Orange, Sahne, Rahm, sprechen, reden, sehen, schauen, kochen, sieden. Okay? And here, from here you have the word ist hart gesotten. Something like that comes from sieden. Okay. So we have learnt about ideology, standard language ideology. We have learnt about Umgangssprache a little bit. I mean, I have not covered a lot. A little bit difference in Umgangssprache. Let us move on to the concepts pluricentricity and pluriareality, because these are two really important concepts when you talk about variation in German linguistics. What is pluricentric? This is taken from Ulrich Ammon, Pluricentric and Divided Languages, which was published in the International Handbook of Sociolinguistics, Science of Language and Society. Ulrich Ammon says, the term pluricentric language alludes to the age-old notion that languages evolve around cultural or political centers, whose varieties have higher prestige. This leads to the spreading of these varieties or their features. Similarly, such centers can be the nucleus of standardization processes to which pluricentric languages relate. Pluricentric languages comprise two or more standard varieties, each of which can be ascribed to or is valid for one center. Now, one more term that we come across is plurinational, and the term comes from Ulrich Ammon himself. He says mostly the term center refers to nations or states. Sometimes they are also called plurinational. Examples would be English with the standard varieties of the UK, USA, Australia, French, with varieties in France, Belgium, Canada, and Switzerland. Is German pluricentric? There is some debate in research on German linguistics as to whether German is pluricentric or pluriareal. For someone like Stefan Elspaß, we should not use the term pluricentric for German. So there is a national standard of German in Austria, in Switzerland, in Germany. Stefan Elspaß disagrees and says a language can have several centers which do not necessarily correspond to nations. Okay, so please bear in mind, the centers do not have to be in tandem with, they do not have to correspond to nations. Each center provides a standard variety with its own norm of uses which do not necessarily constitute national varieties. The argument continues by stating that there is so much variation within the German standard as a whole that the state borders between these three countries, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, only explain an irrelevantly small part thereof. Instead, a pluriareal model with a large number of hierarchically ordered, often overlapping centers that partly disregard the modern state borders claim to be much better explanation of this variation. Okay? So, on this point, I would like to go back to this map. Now, you have Switzerland, which is not even clearly visible on this map. Austria, not even clearly visible on this map. What Stefan Elchpass is trying to say, he's saying that a term like Metzger, it goes beyond nation, the borders of a nation. Metzger you also see in Austria. Metzger you also say in Switzerland. And because of such linguistic phenomena, Elspas proposes the term pluriareal and not pluricentric because variation does not necessarily has to be related to a country. Now that we have discussed these many concepts, let us move on to the final section for today. I'll talk about German in Switzerland and then I'll talk about German in Austria. I will let it be here. I'll just drink some water. Okay, so now we have the concept of diglossia. German-speaking Switzerland has been used in linguistic literature as a classic example of diglossia, a situation in which a community uses two distinct forms of the same language. One is the prestige form learned in school and used in one set of contexts, and the other acquired as a native language and used in other set of contexts. Maybe some of you have experienced this personally. If you go to Switzerland, if you live in Switzerland, for example, Raf, you have lived in Switzerland, I presume lived and studied there. So you must have experienced these two different kind of uses, defined uses. In Switzerland, the two distinct forms are Swiss Standard German. So here the abbreviation, please remember SSG, this is used by Sarah Fagan. Similar to the standard language of Germany and Schweizerdeutsch, a cover term for all German dialects spoken in Switzerland. So on the one hand, we have Swiss Standard German, and then we have Schweizerdeutsch, which is umbrella term for all German dialects. Then there is no colloquial uses, Umgangssprache, as there is in Germany to mediate between SSG and the local Swiss dialects. Although it is common to treat German-speaking Switzerland as a classic case of diglossia, the term does not currently apply in the strict sense, since Swiss Standard German, in contrast to dialect, does not have the status of a prestige variety. All right, let's go back to the concept. You have one prestige variety, which is learned in school and used in one set of contexts, and you have other acquired as a native language and used in other set of contexts. In Switzerland, this does not apply absolutely because we have Swiss Standard German, which does not have the status of a prestige variety. Now, there is a formal versus informal divide. It has generally been argued that Swiss Standard German is used in writing and formal speech and dialect in informal speech. Fagan argues that although these may have been the traditional domains of two varieties, the division does not reflect current practice. Fagan's argument is based on Klein's and Ivar Verlen's research, according to whom dialect is being used increasingly in informal speech, in formal domains, and even in formal speech. Okay? My own view is that Fagan is not entirely correct because at the university classes are held in German or standard Swiss German, but it is common that teachers and students they switch to dialect during the break. So we have a class of 2 hours. If you have a break of 15 minutes, then they would start talking in Swiss German. When the class resumes, then they go back to standard German. So at least at the university level, the formal-informal divide is maintained. Now we move to the concept of functional diglossia. We talked about diglossia. What is functional diglossia? The relationship between the two varieties of Germans used in Switzerland is treated by many linguists as a special kind of diglossia, based on mediala diglossie, where the standard language is used for writing and the dialect for speaking. Rasch suggests that the term functional diglossia may be preferable since it describes a situation in which each variety is allocated certain functions. Verlaine points out the shortcomings of a simple model of mediale diglossie, noting that Swiss German dialects are written as well as spoken. Dialect is used in obituaries, for postcards, and especially in electronic communication such as emails or SMS, and now WhatsApp. What about orthography of Swiss Standard German? The letter sharpest S is not used in Swiss Standard German. It is replaced by SS. So here I have given an example. What about spellings of foreign words? Okay, so in Germany Standard German you have debut written in a particular way. In Swiss German it's written in a different way. So moccasin, moccasin, schick, schick, sauce, sauce, resume, resume. Okay, so you see a more French-oriented way of writing, and when I say that, please bear in mind that Switzerland also has a large French-speaking population. Okay, so it's not just German. There is German, French, Italian, and Romansch. Spellings in Swiss Standard German may indicate differences in pronunciation. So you have in Germany Müsli, in Swiss Standard German it's Müsli. You have Züricher, and there you have Zürcher. Okay? Then morphology, Swiss Standard German, you have Gastung, Betreffnis, Sehnlichkeit, Dorfschaft, Bähnler. Okay? Betreffnis, this is not very supportive. So you have words that do not exist in Standard German. Then what about the suffix li? It can indicate diminutives as in Brötli, so bread roll, a sackli, a plastic bag. It does not always indicate the diminutive form. So for example, this is quite an interesting one, and because you have done morphology in the last two lectures, so parsley in German is called Petersilie, but in Switzerland this is called Peterli. It's so you have the suffix li attaching there, but not as a diminutive. It doesn't mean little parsley. Then what about the suffix ieren? You have in German kampen, grillen, handikappen, parken. In Swiss German you have kampieren, grillieren, handikapieren, parkieren. Ich parkiere mein Auto dort. Then inflectional affixes, linking elements. In Germany you say Uhrmacher, in Switzerland Uhrenmacher, Landgemeinde, Landsgemeinde, Tageblatt, Tagblatt, Sonntagsausgabe, Sonntagausgabe. What about phonology? You have Chemie, Chemie, China, China, Chronik, Chronik, Chor, Chor, ich, sicher, sicher. Okay? Then some words from the Swiss German lexicon. So in Germany you say Ausländerbehörde for Immigration Office, in Switzerland Fremdenpolizei. In Germany you say Zwangsvollstreckung for foreclosure, in Switzerland Betreibung. Then in Germany you say Anzeigen to report someone to police, then you have Verzeigen. Then in Germany you say innerhalb, Switzerland innert, das Fahrrad, das Velo, der Friseur, der Coiffeur. And here you see the French influence. Okay, Velo and Coiffeur. Then let's talk about the final section for today, Germany and Austria. The main Austrian work that codifies Austrian Swiss Standard German is Österreichisches Wörterbuch. The first edition was published in 1951. The 43rd edition was published in 2017. This is taken from a broadcast, and here I'm not sure if you can read from there. It's about Wetteraussichten, Wettervorhersage, weather prediction, and the reporter is saying not ich hab zum Schluss, he's saying ich hab zum Schluss der Sendung, and this kind of ich hab, it's a very Austrian way of speaking, influenced by influenced by the dialect, talking about this rounding feature, ha, a, o. So one Austrian feature in the pronunciation of vowels is the use of o instead of a in the realization of a. So you don't say ast, ost, backe, bocke. Okay. The diphthong I, another systemic difference in the pronunciation of vowels involves the diphthong I, in Germany realized as I. In Austrian Standard German, the vocalic member of the diphthong has a less open pronunciation. According to Hall, for example, a typical realization of diphthong in Austria is in that manner. So kein, so here kein, here in Germany kein, and here can. So Bill, please correct me if I'm not doing it correctly, or maybe you can do it for us if...
I'd say can't, but that's for the monotone.
Oh, so you will take away the also... Did I hear N at the end?
Well, the N would be taken off and the vowel nasalized.
Okay, so it's the... what do you call nasal Nasalschwund. There's a nasal loss. Okay, well, I mean, this is taken from Sarah Fagan, and Fagan knows that it would be articulated as can, or Schweiz, not as Schweiz, but as Schweiz. Now, let us move on to some more features of Austrian Standard German. Durch in Austria will be durch. Kirche will be Kirche. What about China? In Austrian Standard German, this will be China. Chemie will be Chemie, and this is something you also did in the phonetics and philology classes and supervisions. What about difference in Vokallänge? So you have in German Chef, in Austrian this is a bit longer, Chef. Husten becomes short, Husten. Behörde becomes short, Behörde. And Granit becomes Granit. Okay. Then morphology of Austrian Standard German, the derivational suffix erl is particularly productive in Austrian Standard German. So you have Schnackerl, Wimmerl. Linking elements and inflectional affixes. So you have in German Standard German Toilettenpapier, in Austrian Toilettepapier, Fabrikbesitzer, Fabriksbesitzer in Austria, Aufnahmeprüfung, Aufnahmsprüfung in Austria. Syntax, in German you would say, obwohl sie andauernd etwas hatte sagen wollen. Okay. Auxiliary, main verb and modal verb. So, and this is your second part of the sentence, subordinate clause. In Austria, you can hear people saying, obwohl sie andauernd etwas sagen hatte wollen. Okay. So, sagen can come first and hatte goes later. In the Austrian variety, there is some variation in syntax there. Variation in the use of articles in Austrian Standard German. So you can find die Brezel or das Brezel, der Kunde, die Kunde, der Monat, das Monat. In Germany, you have die Brezel, der Kunde, der Monat. Some difference in vocabulary. So Spülbecken, Abwasch, Februar, Feber, Luftpost, Flugpost, Januar, Jänner, Zwischenmahlzeit, Jause, Abendessen, Nachtmahl, Kissen, Polster, chemische Reinigung, Putzerei. Jammern ist Raunzen in Austria, Tasse ist Schale, Stuhl ist Sessel, Krankenhaus ist das Spital. Okay, and final remarks for today. The German language exhibits, as I have tried to show in a little bit detail, German language exhibits substantial variation depending on where it is spoken. Now, the question of what is standard and which variety or form should be used may be determined by language ideologies, and this is something I want you to think about when you go home, why the variety that becomes standard becomes the standard. Also, think about Keats-Deutsch. This is something we will discuss in our third supervision when we discuss variation in German. We'll discuss about the sociolinguistic status of Keats-Deutsch. So that will be all for today. Thank you very much and have a nice weekend.